For fuck's sake.
For fuck's sake.
For fuck's sake.
And another fine introduction. Thanks to my friend Dan Gunn, who whipped up that tune, which I have reused 3 times now. In China. He's based in China right now. So thank you for that again, Dan. And some former colleagues. Phil, from my days at Harvey Mudd College. Brian and Pete from Intel back in the day. And Mark, worked with Mark at his company while at Intel. And he also used to work at Intel. As you can hear, my voice is still doing great in the Las Vegas weather. I'm drinking some tea. But let's get to it. Today is December 30th in the wee hours. It's still officially December 30th and still officially 2020. Both of those things are about to change. One and then the other. As you've probably gathered from the title of the show, Economeering, today I'm planting the topic arc seed for discussion about all things economy. The economy means many different things to many different people. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's sort of a part of how we conduct our lives. It's about working and buying things and selling things and conducting our existence. And it sort of governs the ease with which we're able to do that. But let's get started on a seemingly tangential topic. Ketogenic diets, or diets in general. How on earth is that related? Well, let's see. How many times have you either changed the way you eat or changed the way you observe other people eating? In that, well, maybe you've gone on a diet, or maybe you have a friend or a family member or a loved one, whomever, that has changed their diet either temporarily or as part of a New Year's resolution or however they accomplish it. And the goal of either you or them is to stick to that diet and, for better or worse, whatever the goal is, achieve the goal. I myself adopted a ketogenic, I'll say lifestyle, I guess. In May of 2018, I wrote about it, a couple articles. The reason I wrote about it was because I found that any time I mentioned that I was going keto, which is very trendy, there was always an opinion. There was always somebody who had their insights that they would like to share with me, or their thoughts on it, or their opinions, or their views. How they didn't like it, how it sucked, how. And so it occurred to me that it's far too easy for people to, and myself included, a long time ago, to offer unsolicited advice. I didn't really ask for your thoughts, views, and opinions on my dietary choices, but here they are. So, you know what you should do, or that doesn't work, or, basically your views shared with me without my asking are sort of, they're unsolicited. So I wrote about my experiences. First, before I tried keto, I tried other, vegetarian, vegan, even sort of paleo, but I never really, I kind of dipped a toe into the waters, but I never subscribed completely. I never did the reading. I always kind of went with, I guess this is vegan. And I'm probably more vegetarian, but I kind of, I said, you know what, I'm just going to go very simple. vegetables only, no meat. I don't know that I was completely, I don't really drink milk, so really no dairy. But anyway, so I tried a few different things, and at some point, a former classmate of mine, not Dan Gunn, Dave Gann, you can see how I'd confuse those. Dave Gann posted on Facebook, of all places, that he had, I think he had dropped like 40 pounds. And sticking to a keto diet. I said, wow, that's pretty good. So I decided to do the reading, figure out how this really worked. And while I wanted to avoid getting into the trap of weighing and measuring both food and me, eventually I would discover that that is really quite sensible to do. So anyway, so I did a lot of reading. I did a lot of just research in general. And I started compiling, things I liked that could fit into the keto diet. Started looking at which nutritional elements might be missing, looked at supplements, assembled a shopping list of ideas and items, menus, and gathered up all these things. Dove in with both feet, intermittent fasting, OMAD, 1 meal a day. I think I got my daily carb intake down below 10 grams on the typical one meal. And over a few months, I lost 70 pounds and felt better, going to the gym twice a day and all that. So I wrote about it because I found that everybody was an expert, but nobody knew what they were talking about because they were talking about their view of me, but I knew about me and I knew what I was experiencing and I knew that I enjoyed what I was eating and how I felt and all these other things. So I think it's very easy to tell someone else what you think you understand based on your own experiences. And it's very easy as well, especially in the days now of social media fire hoses, to hear these viewpoints and then to kind of accept them. Because if you transfer expertise onto someone that you have other relations with, friendship or professional, personal, whatever, then you may be lulled into a false sense of knowledge based on a preponderance of opinion that may not actually be correct. There are countless papers on what sorts of fats, how much fat one should consume in their diet, low fat, no fat, how those are replaced with carbohydrate, how salt is bad for you, where those data come from, where those opinions come from. Maybe they're wrong. There are entire books now written about salt. I actually have it on my Kindle. You got to read it. Entire books about fasting. There are countless YouTube videos now about keto diets and fasting and paleo, keto, Mediterranean, all these different diets. So what I discovered about me is I took the data for myself. I assembled a diet that worked for me, that matched a keto style, and I was off to the races. So the take home is I can listen to various experts, various doctors, nutritionists, people who may or may not have their own agenda, may or may not be current, may or may not have bought into the things that they were taught and have heard for decades. Low-fat diet, better than high-fat diet. Oh, there's nothing wrong with grains. Well, that's fine on a macro level. I don't mean macronutrients. I mean macro, the big picture. But for an individual, maybe a particular diet works better. I found that to be true. So I wrote several Medium articles. The titles are Danny to Keto, an homage in a humorous way to Danny DeVito. Danny to Keto, parts 1 through 7 probably. couple of graphs, many links, some articles, some diet items, some pictures. Not of me, because that's not any of your concern. But the idea was not to show off my progress so much as to explain my decisions, so that in the event that the topic comes up and I would like to express my opinion, it is not here's what you should do, but here's what I did and what worked and what didn't for me and the outcome. Take from it what you will. So how on earth does this apply to the economy? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. We'll see. So today, when we hear, we read, when we look at the economy around us, we hear, certainly, that the stock market is up or down, that the economy is good or bad, that the deficit is high or low, increasing or decreasing. Decreasing. But the debt, these are things that we hear, and they kind of sound like low fat, low salt. All these things. These are notions that stop having meaning, and they just sound like trigger words, or they sound like warnings, or they sound like oh, I've been trained to think that that's bad, so I will just accept that as an alert. Stop spending. Who's going to pay for it? All these tropes that we hear. And I will point out that I am still, I will say, undecided. The more reading I do, the more interesting it is, and that's why I'm planting this topic arc, because I would love to talk about it some more. I've become a fan of Mark Blyth, a professor at Brown. He's a political economist, has a lot of interesting insights, and he's pretty good at explaining his views. I recently read The Deficit Myth by Dr. Stephanie Kelton. I recently read Arguing with Zombies, which is a collection of articles by, why am I forgetting his name? I gotta look this up. I feel like an idiot. Paul Krugman, thank you. I didn't have to look it up. It came to me. So Paul Krugman, he's a Nobel Prize winner, economist. I'm not sure. I assume he's a doctor. I don't know his credentials, so I apologize for that. But Paul Krugman certainly has been writing a lot on the topic of economics and the economy for a long time, and so it was an interesting book. I've read some other things, and I did minor in economics. Engineering and economics probably go together pretty well, although it turns out that economics needs philosophical and psychological inputs or understanding as well. But engineering plus economics equals economeering, because I am not an economist, and most people aren't, and yet the economy is something that we hear about, we're told about, we don't really understand, but we are affected by it every single day. Both the way it is today, the economy today means not a lot of jobs, not a lot of spending. We're at I don't know about which point. I was going to say the halfway point, but that's not true. We are in the thick of this pandemic as I'm speaking. It's been in the U.S. certainly the better part of this year, if not longer, of 2020. It's had various, mostly devastating effects on various parts of economies. But that's where we can start, is when the discussion of the economy comes up, it is often viewed from a particular vantage point, often rather high up. So the national economy. If you're talking about state governments, they'll talk about the state economy. If you're talking about a city, the city economy. So where I live in Las Vegas, the economy is very tourism and hospitality centric. So if you're in the service industry, or if you are a business person, all in those lines, so you own a restaurant or a bar, Maybe you are in the resort business, casino, show, entertainment. Vegas was hit quite hard because the tourism levels dropped. Fun fact, tourism in Las Vegas, a city of approximately 2 million people in the larger metropolitan area. According to the Las Vegas Convention and Tourism Board, I think that's right, LVCTA. You can go to their website, lvcta.something. Up until, this year, so years prior, something on the order of 950,000 people per week visiting. Tourists, visitors for trade shows, conventions, vacation, whatever. And that number is off significantly. I think at least 40% down, and probably expenditure is down even if people do come here. Certainly room rates were lowered, and so a lot of factors had to get adjusted fairly quickly to remain afloat. So that's a local economy. The state economy, well, decisions made by the governor of a state may seem to be confusing at a city or a local level because the considerations are for an entire state rather than a locality. So I know here the governor, Sisolak, has been chided or worse because of his shutdown views, and eventually they split them between, how to shut down Las Vegas versus Reno, which are the two main population centers, Washoe and Clark counties. So your locality will have its issues, and when you are facing what's going on in your backyard or front yard or, your workplace, your local government has a different view of the economic conditions than does your state government. And of course, the federal government has a vastly different view. So if you are a modern monetary theorist or a Keynesian or a supply sider or, there's any number of flavors, you have a different view of how those views differ. And therein lies the debate. And I think occasionally some confusion. So there are several things that I hope to talk about over, coming episodes along these lines. And like I said, I am not an economist. I certainly took micro, macro, money and banking, certainly read quite a bit. And we've all seen the economy because we are the economy. Don't let anybody tell you different. The stock market is an indicator, perhaps. In my opinion, it's sort of like saying, well, a lot of people are winning at craps. So the economy is doing well. But the economy is production, it's consumption. That's us. Those are the people that make the economy. So the thing that I have noticed as I've been reading more and kind of reconnecting with my economic interests is clearly the stimulus checks are a big topic of discussion right now as I'm speaking. Will we get $600? Will we get $1,200? Will you get anything if you make too much? And there are disjoint arguments about, people with a lot of money getting the checks that don't deserve it, but they're means tested, but that doesn't always make it into the talking point. So it's targeted stimulus, which is probably not the right word because these are really bailouts on an individual basis. Bailout is a popular word when you're talking about corporations, not so much when you're talking about people. And I've noticed, particularly, despite the fact that Nevada is a blue voting state, so to speak, and the color of states is ridiculous. That's another discussion. But there are several people, chit-chat at the bar kind of thing, that view stimulus or what's called entitlements, even though that's sort of loaded. But anytime a government is assisting people so that they don't die or that they can continue to contribute to society, like student loans or food programs, rent and mortgage assistance, any of these programs, the social safety nets that were developed back in the 30s, those are viewed as handouts and entitlements, and people are getting something for nothing, and it's my tax dollars. And if you believe in the MMT view of the world, it's not actually our tax dollars. So there's a lot of, and that's just the tip of the iceberg, so I'm glossing over some of this stuff. But the thing that is that's tricky is that there's suppose, going back to the diet analogy, if you argue that a high-fat diet is bad for you, and you go ahead and eat the no-fat, high-carbohydrate item, whatever it is, you may find later that, especially from a personal perspective, that was throwing off your insulin levels, that was leading to weight gain, it was leading to arterial inflammation, that was leading to sclerosis, perhaps, or other maladies. Inflammation is a big deal, so that's I'm not a doctor either, but so the take home is that going with what you've always known to be true without knowing the why can lead to personal health issues in that case, right? So the same could be true with economic or a variety of other issues. And I think some of this begins with those talking points, or that those repeated premises that we are inundated with from school, from our public school days, or wherever you attend or wherever you receive your education, which is, by the way, a completely different, huge topic that we'll get to another time. So the economy, debt, deficit, and the mantra that is always repeated, especially from MMT folks, is a national economy is not a household economy. And they leave it at that, right? Well, I mean, they go into detail, but they say that the federal government, because it can print money, doesn't have the same concerns as your home budget, right? Like, if you have to pay the rent, and you're short, that's a problem. If you're the government and you have to pay the rent, you just print more money. And that's a very simplified view of the world, but I think the thing that's left out of that quite often is, in our day-to-day life, we do not interact with the federal government. There have been some discussions about individuals receiving or being assigned or generally having accounts with the Federal Reserve Bank, which would make stimulus payments super easy, for example. So if that were to be the case, then perhaps we would have a slightly more intimate relationship with the federal government and the Federal Reserve banking system. But generally speaking, you and I are touched by the economy closest to us, ourselves, our own financial situations, I guess. The local government, who's working, who isn't, up to your county, state, wherever you live in the world. The economy closest to you is the one that you feel the most, I think, and kind of ripples and trickles down and trickles up, and depending on which models you agree with and believe in and whatnot. So think about this. There are memes floating around about your tax dollars and how your tax dollars and sales tax, income tax, unemployment tax. There's a whole list, depending on which meme you're looking at. And there's a conflation of federal income tax, for example, and state income tax and other state taxes and local taxes. Well, in the United States and most places, a country that has monetary sovereignty that can print its own money is in a very different situation than the localities within it. So, for example, we live in Nevada, where I am. Nevada cannot print its own money. So the budget and the economic conditions of Nevada are not as far off from a personal household budget and economic situation as is the state of affairs of a federal government that can print its own money. So I think this is often a source of, I'm not going to say confusion, but it's an opportunity to either muddy the waters or clarify them, because a state, or depending on where you are, so a province, a state, whatever the in the hierarchy, there's the country, and then so here in the United States it would be a state. The state is still beholden to the federal government for money, right? Currency, the fiat currency that is the U.S. dollar, comes from the Fed. The federal government can print more, can sell bonds and whatnot. States can sell bonds, but they cannot print their own money. So it's much closer to the way a business or a household budget and financial situation can be classified than is the federal government. So the take home, and something that is surely the topic of discussions moving forward, is whether the understanding of whether you're Keynesian or supply side or MMT, whatever, is the function of a country and the constituency below it, the counties, the states, the counties, the cities, and the regions, the neighborhoods, the people, ultimately the people. Is the relationship between all those clear enough so that when there is a discussion about who's going to pay for the stimulus money, does that make sense? Does the argument against enabling the people that are the economy to pay their bills and eat and not be homeless ultimately feed back into the system? Or are we too worried about how the kids and the grandchildren are going to pay this debt to ourselves, or is it to somebody else, right? So there's a lot of different terminology that floats around. And I personally think, in my research and observations lately, there's an over-reliance when explaining these things on macroeconomics. So you'll see or hear discussions about, how are we going to pay for it, right? Unemployment numbers, where's the tax revenue going to come from? Tax cuts reduce tax revenue. Therefore, the budget deficit goes up because there's less tax revenue coming in. We have to borrow more, so there's more debt. We have to sell treasury bills. I think I said treasury bills. I'm sorry, I think I said bonds earlier. Treasury bills that the government can sell. So how do you grasp all these different things that are happening on a personal level when you hear in the news, when you read about it in Twitter and elsewhere, about these macro factors, these things that don't really touch you directly? The stock market, unless you are trading in the stock market frequently, unless you are invested, the stock market being up or down has a sort of a secondary or tertiary effect, because ultimately it's like when there was always these, how did the dad do at the dog track? That depend, how that winning or losing would determine, dinner or gifts or whatever, right? So surely, when investment is yielding gains, profits, and other liquidity and credit and all these other nice things, perhaps there's more investment, perhaps there's opportunity to hire more. These are the trickle-down factors. But if you are not invested in the stock market, then hearing that the market is up may yield a feeling that things are good. But if at the same time you are unemployed, well, what does that really mean? And I think there is no better example than the restaurant industry in the United States. Despite the fact that many people have done well in these pandemic times because of their investments, because of their participation in infrastructure. I'm talking to Jeff Bezos, talking to Google, talking to Facebook. So people that are involved in a infrastructure plays, in logistics, right? Getting packages to people when small businesses have to be shut. Content, YouTube, podcasting. So there are ways that you can capitalize on this, and some people have done so in spades. But there are many people, so the stock market is up and there's a lot of speculation because it's very much like gambling, in my opinion. You're speculating, you're placing your wagers on stocks that might go up, and by extension, derivatives and possibly commodities. Maybe you're playing in Bitcoin, other cryptocurrencies. So if you are able to participate in these markets that don't have a direct connection to on-the-ground commerce, then you're probably feeling like things are okay. Maybe you're in Congress and you're completely out of touch with humanity. But if you are a restaurant owner or a service industry employee, if you're a dealer at a casino, if you are in the tourism industry, the stock market is up, but you may be having tough times. So how does that square, right? So my contention, and something that I will, again, hope forms a nice chunk of the economeering topic, my interest in this is that the macro view of the economy is useful, but not, maybe it's normative, but it is not useful for the people that make the economy. That's us. Because while some economist who's advising a president or a member of Congress or in a think tank, an economist may view unemployment and sector unemployment as indicators for the strengths or weaknesses of a market and how it will impact production and stocks and GDP and all these other gross numbers. At the end of the day, the micro view, the microeconomic view is, am I able to pay my bills? Am I able to pay the rent? Am I going to be homeless next month? Am I going to be starving? Do my kids, is my family paid for, accounted for? So by taking a macroeconomic view, economists and the models that they develop and sometimes advocate that they use for making decisions or advising their colleagues and clients and whomever, right? Like I said, presidents, Congress, whomever, are those models that are typically macroeconomic, accounting for realities that individuals that are the economy are actually facing. So one of the books I have not read yet is, and I want to try to take a stab at getting this right, The Case for a Job Guarantee by Pavlina R. Tcherneva. I apologize right now for that. Hopefully that's close. So The Case for a Job Guarantee. That's a big factor in modern monetary theory. That camp is very strong on making the jobs guarantee a critical facet of stabilizing an economy, so that there is capital injection without concern for deficit spending, because government deficit is economic surplus in the hands of the private sector. Okay, that's balancing, right? If the government is spending more than it has, deficit spending, then the money must be ending up on the other side of the ledger, and so we all have more money to spend. It's more money in the system. Okay, sounds good. That view is tempered by concerns for inflation. So too much money dumped into an economy will lead to price increases. Okay, sounds okay to me so far. There's there's a piece of a talk that I've tried to find, and I will try to find it again, from Mark Blyth, professor at Brown. He says the value of the dollar comes from, well, the US dollar is a global reserve currency, which is a nice feature, but it comes from the confidence that everyone has in the dollar not going anywhere, not going to disappear anytime soon. And that comes not only from our brief history on the planet, but our sheer military strength, our capacity to innovate and produce, right? So the US dollar has a certain cachet in the world as a global currency, as the petrodollar. Confidence in the dollar is not going anywhere. But what happens when people start losing their jobs? The economy turns south, not a lot of money floating around, literally. So the government can inject these dollars with confidence. That's the MMT view, with confidence that it's not going to do tremendous damage to economic standing on the globe, that price inflation is the concern, but not the actual deficit number. We can just print money all day within some sort of weird limits that are sort of nebulous. That's one of the weaknesses of MMT, I think. But the facet that is the greatest concern to me is the jobs guarantee. So again, the case for a job guarantee. Have to read it, have not read it yet, but in the same talk about the aircraft carriers and the strong dollar, Professor Blyth also mentioned the problems with a jobs guarantee is that job guarantees are also inflationary. So if everyone is able to work, then everyone is able to change jobs. And if you're guaranteed to always have a job, and that's always a sort of nebulous guarantee as well, then I'm not making enough doing this job. I'm going to go and get a different job for more money. So the mechanics of this guarantee, I hope, are laid out in the book I mentioned, because to me, and so let me backtrack a little bit. So in Professor Blyth's presentation, he was talking about private sector job guarantees. And I know from my experience in the past that there are some countries, some governments with policies that offer something like a job guarantee, or they make it difficult to downsize, lay off. So these have issues, but ultimately at the end of the day, while they do empower employees and they are generally good for at the micro level, they can be inflationary. They can cause, prices to rise. The MMT view on jobs guarantees are more local level, private sector guarantees, which I think are also problematic for a variety of reasons. But to me, that is the most hand-waved component, which I hope I can glean some sort of insights about where the hands are waving from that particular book, since that is the one frequently referenced. But if you are able to always find a job in the public sector, if I didn't say that before, public sector job guarantees from MMT. Well, what does that do to the economy at the same time, right? So in Dr. Kelton's book, The Deficit Myth, she suggests that public sector job guarantee with a minimum wage set slightly above the prevailing minimum wage would enable a de facto increase in minimum wage, because you don't have to regulate it. You simply create a marketplace for the increased wage, which sounds good. However, the public sector hiring infrastructure, to me, would seem a bit of a challenge. That is never really clarified. And again, I got to read that book, because to me, that is the overarching problem. You cannot simply employ people. And there can be an argument made that back in the 30s, as we were coming out of the Depression, the Roosevelt, I can't remember what it was called. It was essentially the shovel-ready job thing that that word's been tossed around in more modern times. So public sector, infrastructure, road building, etc. In fact, our national highway system came after World War II, but it was certainly a massive national infrastructure project. So there are projects that are probably worthy of a public sector jobs program, but guaranteed jobs in the public sector, to me, are problematic, but are also the topic of much more research and discussion. But that is to me the sticking point for modern monetary theory from a macro view. So that's the macroeconomic view of a jobs guarantee as a way to stabilize and strengthen an overall market. Right? But what does that really mean at the micro level? What does that mean to me? What does that mean to you? What does that mean to local jobs, local job programs, et cetera? So I think that's one example to me where macroeconomic discussions, theory, explanation, policymaking can sort of break down when you realize that some of those macro variables that they're using in their models maybe aren't based in reality. I know that's crazy, right? So exactly what does it mean to be unemployed? What does it mean to be underemployed? Do unemployment numbers as reported in the news, when you see jobs reports and whatnot, are those accounting for people who have given up? Right? There are two unemployment numbers. One is usually in the news and one is more reflective of reality. We always hear these things, and then if you really want to start reading, I'm sure you can delve into where the data is coming from. Is that self-reported? Is that through unemployment payouts, right? If you receive unemployment insurance, you are accounted for somewhere when that money runs out. Or if you stop looking, how does that get counted? Is that always reported? Is that reported transparently? So what does it really mean? Because a stable economy arguably has as low, as close to zero an unemployment percentage as possible. But what does it mean if you want your unemployment to go to 0, but with underemployment above 0%? So merely looking at the opaque you have a job numbers may not account for you are able to pay your bills numbers, right? So there again, macro concerns to me gloss over micro concerns, which are those of the people in the economy. That's us, that's me, that's you. So I think one of the ways to approach understanding of how the economy works, I mean, it's sort of like understanding how a swimming pool works, right? When you're in the swimming pool, it's good to know where the stairs are, where the ladder is, where the lifeguards, if there are more than one, where's the deep end, where's the shallow end, how does treading water work, right? If you are in the swimming pool, it is really a good idea to know, to have a minimal set of skills, how that swimming pool works and how it can harm you, right? Because other people may be adjusting the chlorine and the muriatic acid levels. They may have cleaning equipment. They may have floating devices. They may have those lifeguards. The support infrastructure around the pool is important as well, but you're in the pool. It's important that you know how that pool works and what can go wrong for you, right? And I hate to go here, but there's I think it was on 60 Minutes many, many years ago. There was a little mini epidemic of people in smaller, like a hot tub, small pools with a shallow end drain. The suction in the drain was strong enough so that if you happen to find yourself sitting on the drain, the suction could possibly completely remove your intestines. I'll leave that there, but so it's critical for something like a swimming pool to understand how it works and what can hurt you. In my mind, the economy, which is you and me, like a swimming pool, is something that we should understand because we are in it. And there are a lot of things in it that are beyond our control, but which can do us harm, or which can lead to a pleasant afternoon with filling our pockets with whatever the equivalent of money in a swimming pool would be. But the take home is that as members of the economy, as in fact, as we are the economy. I mean, think about it. There are no robots are interesting, and automation is going to be an issue, possibly a growing issue. And I've got a whole series of articles I've written exploring, just pondering universal basic income, how that relates to job guarantees. So I've just dipped my toe in the swimming pool, so to speak, to get a better handle for myself on this, and which is why I want to talk about it. So as automation continues to come onto the scene, that's all well and good. Jobs might go down, but an economy is not only production but consumption. So who is going to be buying things that these robots are making? Who is going to be paying for the services that some, not necessarily robots, but automation systems, AI, cloud services? Somebody has to pay for these things if money remains the fuel of the economy, the capital that flows through it. If there was I was literally sitting in a meeting a couple of years ago where someone presented the notion that this automation scheme will reduce the need for employees in a particular workplace by a frightening percentage, more than half. And that received a positive response. So, but without thinking that through, so let's assume that that's a good intention, right? Like, yay, I've done a good thing. I've saved people from needing to do dangerous or repetitive tasks in a factory, or maybe in the case of an AI, it's phone calls, phone support. The creepy robocallers are becoming more and more normal sounding, which is weird, right? Uncanny valley on the phone. So if you, with best intentions, drive down the need for human employment, human workers, well, UBI proposals, Andrew Yang, others, they're supplementary, but how do you continue to fuel an economy where your consumers are no longer producing? They're not a part of the means of production, right? So they're left to consume based on some minimal basic income, however that would work, right? So that seems to me would be inflationary. So these are the sorts of things, I could keep going, I don't want to, but these are the sorts of things that I would be concerned about during these weird economic times. We are, unless you have your stock in, well, actually, technically Boeing, there have been several stocks that have rebounded as I'm saying this. Boeing with their 737 MAX, which that is an entirely different topic to get into, but even though they were on the ropes, now that the vaccines, despite the fact that we are super early in the deployment of those, vaccines and stimulus money and whether or not jobs reports are reflecting some sort of positive changes or if those are a reflection of people giving up, don't know. But as these things, as 2021 commences shortly, a new president, maybe, assuming there's a new president with whatever slightly left or more centrist, who knows, policies come from that, change in administration, whatever the state of the Congress is at the time, what will that do to future capital injection to aid in recovery? Will there be a continued supply side economic drive to cut taxes or to bail out corporations and banks and, you know, allow the money to go down into the pockets of employees? Or does it make more sense to give money to people and have them spend and have the marketplace choose winners, right? So should Boeing stay in business from a economic standpoint? Well, from a micro standpoint, that doesn't help you put food on the table unless you're an employee. But from a macro standpoint, having a robust transportation sector in the long term, of course, is sensible. And I say, of course, with an asterisk, because maybe that's wrong. So, to me, these are the times where we should really start to look very seriously at how these models work, how economists are viewing our economy. And we're coming to the end, don't worry. And to me, so economeering to me is when I first graduated from college, I used to work at a fruit company in Cupertino making computers. And I'll never forget this guy, I can't remember his name, sitting next to me in our bullpen cubicle. And he referred to himself as he called himself a QA engineer, I think. And I said, "What, isn't your degree in English?" And he said, "Yeah, but I'm doing work of an engineer." So I had my engineering degree, and I kind of felt personally affronted. Is that a word? I took offense. I was not pleased with that statement because to me, and if you are a chef, if you're a doctor, if you're an attorney, there are several professions where whether you have a certification, right? If you're in Oregon, don't call yourself an engineer if you're not a PE. You'll get in trouble, for example. But if you have gone through the higher educational program to earn a title of some sort, and let's not even get into Dr. Biden, but to hear someone claim the same title as though that is a credential can be a little off-putting. So from that perspective, claiming to be an amateur economist, I think, is similarly a touchy subject because I think economists have a certain view of the world that they have developed either with their research and papers and presentations and training, or possibly an ideology about how economies work from their perspective. And I think I've seen this happen on Twitter. The people who don't know what they're talking about, quote unquote, rendering an opinion on the economy is taken as offensive by some economists. So I do understand that, although, well, like I've said it several times now, the economy is us. We are in it. We make it up. I think we should understand it, and we should be able to understand what we do within it and how it is impacted by what we do. Does that make sense? So, sort of inspired by that exchange from 1995, I think. I used to say that I'm driving the big trains when I was getting my degree. I was not yet an engineer, but I was getting an engineering degree, and I was going to be driving the big trains. So I was somewhat flip back then. But I think over the years, you pick up a certain sensibility about how things work, and engineers are typically handed a challenge to overcome, build a bridge to cross this with these resources and limitations, put a person on the moon, dive to the deepest point in the ocean, make a website that can handle traffic for people who need health insurance. So typically, scientists deal with theoretical scientists deal with models. Experimental scientists deal with laboratory experiments and results and check whether they match models. The economists are sort of like those research scientists, right? They can look at models. So theoretically, austerity makes sense because we want to keep that deficit low. Experimentally, well, you have to look at other countries and other economies and how austerity has impacted them and what happens over time and whether they recover. And even then, anyone who's a fan of supply side trickle down, you're either a fan of it because you're a Reagan fan maybe, or you just think it's a good idea, or you have benefited personally, or you're not a fan of it because you look at the numbers and you see what happens to wages and the stratification of incomes and wealth and say happiness, I guess. So economists to me are sort of like the scientists, and me, I'm an engineer. Typically, while physics is interesting, while chemistry is interesting, the chemistry of solvents and solutes, of a flow process, inputs and outputs and accumulation and waste and all that. You can build up a scientific model of how chemical reactions work and thermo and heat exchange and heat transfer. And engineers, they're probably making coffee machines. And I know I'm making coffee, although I'm drinking tea right now. But I know when I'm making coffee, I'm looking at my Fluke IR thermometer and my graduated cylinder. So I have the tools, and I have a practical output based on some scientific understanding, but a much more practical hands-on manipulation and observation of the system that I have on my kitchen counter. So to me, economists are like scientists, economeers are like engineers. And so moving forward, I would very much like to have different facets of, and certainly ongoing conversations about things like universal basic income, jobs guarantees, public-private sector, deficit, debt, the mechanics of treasury bills in a sovereign monetary system, such as the American economy. What does it mean to have a private Federal Reserve? How does there's often the contention that every printed dollar bill or printed currency is debt with interest accruing. That's actually a very popular conception. Is it a misconception? Austerity versus the lender of last resort and capital injection that is the federal government. What does it mean for a state government to be budget constrained? Many times, I know Nevada is one, required, I don't know if this is a federal law, you're required to have a balanced budget at the state level. So what if you can't do that? And we've heard Mitch McConnell, when asked about that, his reply was, well, maybe those states should declare bankruptcy. And if anyone recalls back in 2016 or so, when President Trump took office, he said something to the same effect about the federal government, which you can't do as a federal government. Full faith and credit, all that with our global reserve currency. So, and I'm only scratching the surface here. So really the interest that I have is in discussing the way the economy works from the microeconomic side. What does it mean to an individual person to be employed, underemployed, unemployed, to be able to pay bills, to have savings? What does money really mean? At the end of the day, money is just a quantification of influence to a person. It's something you can exchange for goods and services. So it's sort of a bartering normalization tool. And when I say influence, if you have a lot of money, you can exert a lot of influence, right? So if you take that down to zero, right? If I have $0, I really can't tell anyone to do anything. I can't ask for much. I have zero. But if I have all of the money, I have a lot more influence. So these are the sorts of things that I'm planting as seeds for this particular topic. Economeering is an engineering style view and hopefully discussion and understanding of an economy for and of the people in it. And that is winding down. As I'm speaking to you now, it is now officially 5 minutes after midnight in the UTC +8 time zone here in Las Vegas, Nevada. It is New Year's Eve. I will post this today, 31 December. And I hope that this has been interesting. And I cannot stress enough the fact that these are the seed shows. The first few shows are about planting some seeds for future topics. There will be a meta show wherein I will discuss some production elements and how I would like to have live interaction, guests, and so on. And I hope, this tea is not cutting it today, but I hope my voice improves a little bit, because right now it feels like I've been singing the Star Spangled Banner all day. And I apologize for that. I'm sure you are, if you've made it this far, I'm impressed and I applaud. My voice is sounding pretty bad. So on that note, I will wish anyone listening to this, even after, a very happy 2021. Please continue to stay healthy. Avoid transmission. You know what I'm talking about. And let's see where the world goes, and let's talk about it. What works, what doesn't. I didn't really touch on what works and what doesn't about the economy, because that's far too vast a topic, and it's one that I hope we will address moving forward. So on that note, Happy New Year. Thanks for listening. Please do listen again. Tell your friends, and look for the Meta Show. Always look for the Meta Show episode to figure out where I'm going with this and the ways that you can participate. Thank you very much for listening. Take care.